Hey everyone, and welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're going to do something a little bit different. We are looking at pop culture, specifically the Marvel Multiverse, but through a completely unexpected lens. We're not going to sit here and debate comic book lore in the usual way. Instead, we are looking at this massive, sprawling narrative through the lens of computer science, physics, and systems architecture. Now I know, that sounds like pure science fiction, but the math and the physics we're going to explore here are actually entirely grounded. So get ready, because you're about to see your favorite heroes not just as characters, but as nodes, algorithms, and even glitches in a massive computational lattice.
All right, let's dive right into this. We almost always think of the multiverse as a literal map of planets, right? Just alternate dimensions floating out there in space. But what if we frame it as an operating system undergoing a massive, highly complex software update? If we treat reality as a computational engine, then the major cosmic events we see playing out on screen are actually system architectures competing for dominance. So let's trace exactly how this operating system evolves, going all the way from a rigid, heavily controlled machine to a living, breathing network.
Act 1, the subtractive engine, or basically, ultimate control. To really grasp where this complex system is heading, we first have to look at how it started.
We have to begin with what is basically the ultimate admin approach to reality, which is Kang and the Time Variance Authority. On one side of the multiversal coin, you've got Kang's temporal loom. This represents pure industrial control. It operates through subtractive stability. That means it maintains order by simply eliminating any deviation, violently forcing everything into a single sacred timeline. But as you can imagine, that constant exclusion builds up massive pressure. Now, contrast that with the aftermath. Loki sacrifices himself to become Yggdrasil, the temporal tree. This shifts the entire cosmos over to biological freedom. The tree provides additive stability. It doesn't prune away the differences. It accommodates them, allowing every single branch to find its expression within the much larger structure.
Now, that transition from the loom to the tree is absolutely crucial because it moves the entire universe into what physicists actually call phase space dynamics. And this is where things get really mind-bending. Time is no longer just a linear river that you can easily clip and prune. Instead, the multiverse becomes a five-dimensional construct. It's an incredibly complex landscape of coordinates and frequencies. Different realities are, at their core, essentially the exact same underlying data. They're just vibrating at different frequencies. So to travel between these realities, you aren't just changing physical locations. You actually have to match the specific vibrational signature of that dimension. Otherwise, your very cells start glitching out.
Act 2, the additive engine and the web. So with all these infinite realities suddenly blooming, how do these independent branches actually interact without just violently crashing into one another?
Well, within the branches of the tree, a great web vibrates. This is the web of life and destiny. In our systems architecture framework, the web functions as a coupling lattice for multiversal interpolation. It fundamentally connects spider totems across all these different realities. Essentially, every spider person is running the exact same underlying character configuration, just vibrating at a different frequency and existing in a different substrate. And sitting right at the center of all of this is Madame Web. She sits on the attractor throne. But here's the key. She isn't an algorithm. She isn't calculating paths or dictating selection. She is simply the high-bandwidth connectivity hub that allows the whole system to communicate and stay organically coupled together.
Act 3, the algorithm versus the anomaly. Let's bring these massive cosmic mechanics down to street level for a minute with Miguel O'Hara and Miles Morales.
So Miguel basically views the multiverse like a completely panicked systems administrator. He actively enforces canon events, those predictable shared tragedies, because he genuinely believes they're the load-bearing anchors of the code. He thinks without them, everything implodes. But organic multiversal interpolation isn't based on rigid canon events. It's actually based on organic, anchored beings. Miguel completely misses this because he's relying on Lila, an AI interface that is actually remarkably similar to the TVA's Miss Minutes. Because Miguel lacks a true organic connection to the web, he misinterprets living interpolation as a threat. He's trying to force a dynamic, living network into being a static, dead archive.
Now, what's genuinely fascinating about all of this is how this systemic conflict is baked directly into the animation style itself. Miguel O'Hara operates and is animated at exactly 24 frames per second. He is in perfect one-to-one parity with the environment around him. In data terms, he represents an incredibly high-frequency, tightly controlled sampling rate.
And because Miguel operates at this intense 24 frame per second rate, he triggers something akin to the quantum Zeno effect. He acts as a systemic clamp on reality. By continuously oversampling the state of the universe, he effectively freezes the probability field.
He outright refuses to let the system naturally evolve, and in doing so, he carves out this heavily weighted probability trench that locks the multiverse into those rigid, predictable canon events. Ironically, by desperately clamping down on the system to prevent glitches, Miguel is causing the very incursion pressure and unraveling that he claims to be fighting against.
So compare that intense administrative clamping with Miles Morales. Miles is famously animated on twos, meaning he operates at 12 frames per second against a 24 frame per second background. Now, this isn't just some cool artistic choice. It introduces the brilliant mathematical concept of strategic undersampling.
By sampling his environment less frequently, Miles is doing something absolutely remarkable. He is actively leaving mathematical gaps for the probability field to breathe. Because he isn't rigidly locking down every single microframe of reality, his lower sampling rate generates entirely novel timelines. He basically creates an alias signal. He effortlessly bypasses Miguel's rigid frame-by-frame rules, which allows for true phase space exploration and breathtaking innovation within the system.
And this brilliantly illustrates the core conflict. It really all comes down to two totally opposing architectures. On one side, we have the subtractive model of Miguel, a rigid algorithm that relies on an AI prosthetic, causing phase locking and acting as a systemic clamp. And on the other, we have the additive model of Miles, relying on organic interpolation and intuitive coupling to drive actual innovation, making him a resonant anomaly. It's the fundamental, age-old clash between maintaining order through exclusion versus driving evolution through connection.
Which brings us to a pretty incredible realization. Miguel's calcified, outdated database categorizes Miles as a dangerous anomaly, right? A mistake that simply shouldn't exist. But in computer science terms, Miles is actually a salted hash. A salted hash is randomized data introduced into an algorithm to scramble predictive mapping and keep the system secure and fluid. Miles isn't a mistake at all. He is the exact randomized data the cosmic lattice desperately needs to evolve and prevent total system calcification.
This entirely redefines how we understand the spider sense. We usually just think of it as a localized danger buzzer. But in this framework, it is an organic, high-bandwidth connection directly to the web's probability field straight to Madame Web's domain. When Miles relies on himself, he's utilizing this pure, intuitive coupling. He doesn't need an AI prosthetic like Miguel to run predictive calculations. He is reading the system's carrier wave directly, naturally finding the safest, most coherent path through the lattice.
Ultimately, the source material drives home a deeply vital systems lesson. A system that only ever follows the canon, that only enforces the rules of the past, is ultimately completely stagnant. It absolutely requires the glitch, the anomaly, the salted hash, to break the loop and expand its survival capabilities. Total administrative control, whether we're talking about Kang's LOOM or Miguel's algorithm, always equals collapse. Anomalies aren't mistakes, they are functionally necessary for any complex system to survive and grow.
Which leads us with a really fascinating parallel to our own lives. We've seen exactly how multiversal systems crash and burn when they refuse to allow for interpolation and change. So I want to leave you with this thought. If total administrative control eventually crashes the cosmic system, what rigid canon events in your own life are you blindly enforcing right now? Where are you acting like Miguel O'Hara, clamping down on all the possibilities, instead of trusting the organic interpolation to let your own story evolve? Let that resonate for a bit, and keep exploring.